Hey, this is Jeff. Grab yourself a cup of coffee and join us at the table as we talk to another great leader about faith, church, and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Drip. Ben Stuart is with us today. Rob, this is a guy from your area, the D.C. area.
D.C.
Yeah. Ben is the pastor of Passion City Church in the Washington, D.C., not to be confused with Passion City Church in Atlanta, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. He is the wife, or the husband of the wife. I'm tearing this up already. He is the husband of Donna, and they have 3 kids. And we're going to talk also about what he did down in Texas A&M and with Breakaway Ministries. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. It's good to be with you guys.
I've already butchered the show. We can start all over with that.
Uh-oh.
That's typically
so no, we're good. We're good. Hey, I want to know this, though. I saw on Instagram that you have some connection with the boys from Dude Perfect. What's that story?
Yeah, we go way back, man. Well, they're all from A&M. So, I was led a ministry on the campus A&M for 12 years. And so saw them come through. But then the twins, the Cotton Boys, were in, my wife was a part of the staff of a church in the Woodlands when they were middle school kids. So I met them when they were in middle school. So we go way, way back, and
That's
family,
crazy.
friends, and just watching those guys. I mean, their heart is everything you would wish was true of their heart is true of their heart. They're
That's
just
good to hear.
really special young men, the easiest people to cheer for in the world because they're just good men. So I love those guys.
That's
Now,
cool.
I love have a love-hate relationship with Dude Perfect. One, I love their
Okay.
videos.
Uh-huh.
2, what I hate about it is my boys want to always emulate it. So they're throwing a ball from somewhere at something at all times. Like, hey, if we go on the roof and bounce it off your car and it goes in, what does it count?
Yeah.
So they're inspiring, and I love their character. Their influence on the things that happen in my house sometimes are a little bit different. So
Controversial. Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
well, cool. Well, as we kind of talked before the show, a young man named Luke Lazone kind of brought your name up on a show we did earlier in season 2.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he talked about Breakaway at Texas A&M. And I remember him distinctly saying he shows up at Texas A&M. He hears about this college ministry. It's in the gymnasium, if I'm not mistaken, and just packed with people. Tell us that story. How did Breakaway get started?
Yeah, it started in 1989. I wasn't there. I was a kid in 89, but it was a handful of sophomores just wanted to know God. They didn't have some big vision or grand purpose. They just we want to know God, and would do this little Bible study in their apartment and did it their whole college career. And Greg Mott, who's now the pastor of Houston's First, had a decision to make when he graduated. Do I just go on and get a job, or do I stick with this thing and grow it? So Greg grew it. When I went in college, it was exploding. It was like 1,000 college kids, which was nuts. And then when it moved on to campus, in the center of campus, in the basketball arena, it went crazy. And it was, not uncommon to have 10,000 plus people gathering, and it's still going strong. I mean, I handed it off to Timothy Ateek, who's crushing. And, there's some uniqueness with Texas A&M that allows for that kind of gathering, but it's just a move of God. You just stand there in the middle of this arena and go, Lord, this is amazing, because this is a state school. People vote with their feet. They don't have to be there. They can come if they want. And here they are, hungry to know God. And I loved it. Loved doing it, man. And really had to sense a strong calling from the Lord to leave it, because it's pretty special to be in college ministry, man.
Yeah. I think one of the cool things about stuff like that, all of us in this church world, church growth kind of mindset movement, we're always looking, seeking, asking, praying, wanting, desiring a way to help boost, grow our local churches, congregations, or whatever, ministries, programs. And so we see things like Breakaway, and we wonder what formula they used, or what pattern they use. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I think literally in my experience, every conversation I've had with a leader that's a part of something like a Breakaway, another megachurch, Passion City, whoever you want to name, almost all of them come back and say, well, there was no program. There was no strategy. There was obedience. There was prayer. There was faith. There was a lot of sweat and tears. There were a lot of mistakes. And God was just faithful. And through that faithfulness, he kind of, educated and gave us wisdom on how to do the next things. And so, would you
Yeah.
echo that's the same sentiment for Breakaway?
Yeah, man. I mean, you look at, to get biblical fast on you, but you look at the book of Acts, like Peter gives a great sermon, 3,000 people come to faith. Stephen gives, hey, man, it read like as good a sermon, and they kill him at the end. And you're like, all right, like both of these guys were faithful. Both of these guys, the Spirit of the Lord was upon them. Sometimes they celebrate you, sometimes they stone you. There's just elements you don't get to control.
Right.
And I feel that all the time of like, oh man, God, I would way rather be on the like celebrate me side. Like, can we make sure it works? Like I just got through reading all the prophets, my journey through the Bible now. Like every devotional time was like, Lord, I don't want to be Jeremiah. Like I don't
I
want
don't
to
want to be
Right.
that guy.
where God tells him like, hey, you're gonna have some great illustrations, it's beautiful, and they're gonna like throw you in a hole in the ground. You're like, oh man, like it's like had nothing to do, like that's the era I put you in. That's the ground I asked you to till. Will you do it? And so yes, healthy things grow, and you should see ministries grow, but we don't get to control sometimes where we fit in the story. You know what I mean? But it's
Yeah.
just good that it's awesome we get to be in it.
And we got to reframe our definition of what growth actually is, because it can be numerical, and certainly a lot of times we wish it is numerical, right? I mean, that's a given.
Mhm.
But growth is so much more than just a numerical increase,
Mhm.
right? There's
Yeah.
there's all kinds of growth, and we're certainly not going to have time to get in that conversation today. But I was just curious for you, because I think across college campuses, even on Christian college campuses, we're even now looking for ways, how do we increase the spiritual engagement of our students on a Christian campus? Like, what are the
Yeah.
things that we need to be doing or paying attention to? What are the conversations that are being had by the students that are indicators or keys for us to clue into what God is doing or what God is saying, and how do we step into that? And so, you hear great things about ministries like Breakaway that are still just thriving since 1989, right? I mean, still
Yeah.
pushing the envelope. People get curious, and I think it's a great way. It's a great conversation to have, especially in the college ministry world, for us to
Yeah.
actually look at those factors that are in place in order for the heart, for the soil to be in the right condition or whatever. So no, I
Yeah.
appreciate your thoughts on that.
I think the echo, and Ben, you can step in here, that the passion movement was very similar. Like
Yeah.
Louis and Shelley heard from God; they were faithful. But I remember, this is showing my age a little bit. We were here as undergraduates at Lee University, and the brochure, the printed out, like fill in the little boxes to go to Passion. Like it was, and I don't even know how it got here. Like it was one of those
Yeah.
things. Like it was taking
Mhm.
place in Texas. I don't know how it got here, but it was a move of God that sometimes there isn't a formula to. So what's interesting about your story is you go from something incredible at Breakaway at Texas A&M to a different unique movement, Passion, which has a similar heart for young
Yeah.
adults. How did
Yeah.
that connection get made?
Yeah. Well, people used to ask me for years, they're like, Breakaway, yeah, didn't Louis start that? I'm like, no, he didn't start it. But was he an inspiration? What he was doing down the road at Baylor? Yeah. So Greg and Louis knew each other. When I took over as director of Breakaway, I Louis immediately started asking me to get involved with Passion conferences. So I would help periodically. I'd see Louis a couple times a year. So we just had a relationship for a long time.
Yeah.
And it was actually the day my daughter was born. She was born later that day. Earlier that day, I was at lunch with Louis and in College Station, and he kind of first presented this vision of, I want to see Passion City churches in multiple cities. And he was just speaking that out. And I was like, wow, man, well, all the best. Great. Hope it goes good. I was like, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And, but it wasn't until years later that he was like, hey, I want you to step in and do this. And, then all the questions come out of what does that look like? And how does that work? And,
Right.
Louis is such an amazing visionary. He's like, we're going to Mars. Like, how do you get there? He's like, man, that's, that's not really, I haven't thought through all those steps yet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he believes in a big God and a big vision. And I'm like, all right, man, well, let's think about it together. And, long story really short, we decided to go for it. But the reason we could launch in that venture together is because we had a decade of trust to build. Sometimes when I move into new towns, you meet other ministers and they're like, hey, we should put on a big prayer rally. Hey, we should put on, and I'm like, whoa, let's not do an event yet. Let's build a relationship first.
Right.
Like, let's be truly friends. And when we're truly friends, then we'll find a way to do an event together or something. But Louis and I got to build that friendship for a long time.
So let's deviate for the first time on the show here, and let's talk about church planting just a little bit.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so I wasn't sure if this is the place I was going to geek out on multi-sites or not, because I'm a multi-site geek.
He is.
I
It's true.
came from the Saddleback world, and I was on staff there for
Oh,
several years. I love the multi-site paradigms, but
yeah,
so let's talk about church planting a little bit, because
yeah.
you mentioned something I think is quite significant. Churches have become largely event-based, which you probably know. We have 3 or 4 high peaks in the year: Easter, Christmas, Mother's Day, fall launch, kind of are the 4 big peaks that we do our
Yeah.
big events every year, right? And a couple things in between. So a lot of churches, big, small, mega, mini, doesn't matter. They base their calendar on events, not on relationships. And
Mhm.
so off the cuff, if you were planning a church today as a new pastor, not connected to
Yeah.
Passion City or something else, God to put in your heart to go to a city and plant a church, what would be some of the first steps that you would take before you ever did an event?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what we did, and I'll just tell you the things we did that worked. I'll skip all the stuff we did that didn't work. But you know, um, Louis said something to me when I was in Atlanta that was really interesting because when they launched the church, thousands showed up day one.
Right.
And he just said at one moment, man, Ben, it took a long time to find the church in the event. There were people that were just kind of showing up.
Yeah.
Jesus said at one point, he's like, y'all are just here because you're waiting for free bread. Jesus said it to a crowd once where he's like,
Yeah.
y'all aren't
Yeah.
actually wanting to follow me. You're just hoping I'll like make some wine or something. And Lou was like, it took a while to figure out who our people were because so many were coming. And when he said that, I was like, all right, man, I'm not starting with a big event. I'm not starting with like, let's get Crowder in here and blow this up. So when we moved to town, it was building a core group of relationships, people we had high trust with. So we moved to town with about 30 people. And then we just sent out some email invites. I mean, we purposely stayed off social media
Right.
to what we called vision nights. And we purposely, we scaled it down. It was like a little PA system, a little mic tethered to the little uh, uh, stereo on a stick kind of deal,
Yeah.
and just said, hey, here's our heart for what a church is. Here's why we're here in town. And then we would just mingle and visit with people. And then the takeaway from that was community groups where no worship music, sit you around a table of about 6 people. I would get up front and read a chapter of the Gospel of Mark and explain it. And we would all talk about it. So we had 6 months of that, of like, if you're coming for an event, there's no entertaining. It's the 2 things, when John was trying to summarize Jesus, which is a crazy thing to think about even doing, but in the Gospel of John, he just keeps coming around. Man, he was full of grace and truth. He was full of grace and truth. Like, he really loves people and he really gave them information commensurate with reality. He
Right.
gave them the perspective they need. And so when we started, we're like, let's just build this little community where we love each other sincerely and read the truth together. And when that group is filled with light and heat, the fire, that light radiates out, that heat radiates out. And that's what we'll do. So when we launched big events, because we did bring Crowder out eventually, we did start to do that. Now we had a church to invite him to. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? We had a community already in progress.
Yeah.
That's good.
One of the models that I've been around is the ARC model, which has some similar aspects to it. You start sort of with that core group, and they're unapologetically attractional. I mean, I think that's one of their models and their way they go about it. But it's also the dig deep in the small group and the core group, and so. But you obviously had this framework of college ministry, which is a mobilizing ministry. If there's ever a group of people that you can mobilize, and I've said this often, that the college students have more time and more expendable money than they ever know, and we just get to tell them that. So, like, so how did you make the transition from pastor of college kids to sort of this church planting operation with passion?
Yeah. You mean like timeline or like
Well,
internally?
like
How did I manage
the
it?
shifting the way you pastor, because
Yeah.
they're not the same. I
Yeah.
mean, there's some
No.
similarities, but they're not the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true, man. It was interesting for me because we were an on-campus ministry. I wasn't a college pastor, so we did have the big attractional event.
Right.
Students would come down, come to Christ, and then I was like, let's plug you into the local church because we called ourselves the big end of the funnel. Let's funnel you into
Right.
community. And we felt really good about that. We're helping put students into churches all over this campus. That's actually pretty awesome. We'd have churches come and be set up out in the foyer and not. But what it did for me is I didn't really have to deal with a lot of their problems. Like I would help you come to guys and be like, okay, take your problems over there, take your problem. And it's interesting being a pastor where you're like, oh no, like
Yeah.
you and all your baggage is here. And I'm not responsible for all of your life, but I am your pastor, which
Right.
means, when your husband passes away tragically, that's I'm I'm holding your hand. I'm walking with you, and that that pastoral role has a deeper intimacy, which is beautiful. It's all this stuff starts leaping off the page of Paul when he's like, I can't stop thinking about y'all to the Thessalonians. I'm praying for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like a mom giving birth to you. He talks like that. You go, okay, I get where he's coming from, but it means you carry people in a different way,
Right.
and it can wear you out. But in terms of like college kid to adults, I'll tell you, man, I moved to DC because a third of the city is between the ages of 20 and 35.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I needed to be around that young energy. You know what I'm saying? So like
Yeah.
a lot of what I did and do in college ministry translates up here because I like that young, educated, motivated world. Like we're going someplace. Go, go,
Yeah.
go, go. Let's do this. And that's what led me to this crazy town.
That's cool. And I was going to kind of follow up question, but you just touched on it slightly. Part of the reason why we do the show is because we want to have conversations about how to get college students engaged in the local church. Jeff and I are both local
Yeah.
church guys.
Mm-hmm.
We love the local church. That's our
Mm.
bread and butter. But I mean, in terms of our passion, but how have you been able to, in a church plant setting, and I know DC especially, right? I know Mark Batterson is there and he's done a great work with National, and there are other
Yeah.
really good churches in the Washington, D.C. area. But how have you
100%.
been able to sort of weave into your passion for young adults and really activate that crew, man? Like really go out there and say, hey, this is a place where you belong, get engaged in a local church, stuff like that. I mean, so what are some of the things that you've brought from maybe Breakaway or Texas A&M, or what are some of the values from Passion City that you've woven into that community that allow for young adults, especially college students, to step in, be activated, and be a part of what's happening?
Yeah, no, it's great, man. It's a great question. And just side note on Batterson, and when I got into town, I did with a lot of guys who you try to go meet with a lot of
Right.
pastors and say, hey, I'm a friend, not a threat. We win when we all grow. And like every pastor up here, he was so gracious and a great guy. And it's fun to see when churches get along. I think it
Yeah.
Yeah.
pleases the heart of God. But I saw it in college ministry because it's true of people. Everybody wants intimacy and impact. I mean, those really are the two great longings of the human heart. Like I want to be loved and known, and I want to know. Like I want that intimacy. And as ministers, we're letting them know, man, you're made for God. Colossians says that we're made for
Right.
Him, and so you need to know about Him, and then you also need to be known by Him. A big part of college for me was that being honest with myself and my own heart, where I was disappointed with God and struggling with God. And so fostering that sense of intimacy and belonging with the Lord and then with other people, there's such a longing for that. And then there's longing for impact. I want my life to make a difference. I want it to be worth something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, as ministers, we're all missionaries. You show up in a context and you read the terrain. You're Nehemiah. You ride around town on a horse and go, okay, where's the wall busted up? And, coming to DC, it was like, okay, everyone up here is here to make a difference. You packed up your little 4-door car and drove up here with nothing but a dream because you thought when I get here, I'm going to change the world. And I love that energy. You want to have an impact. You may not be aimed the right direction, but it's better to get a running horse moving. So, all right, let me appeal to that sense of impact and let you know that there's a bigger story playing out around you of what God is doing with the universe. But then the other thing about DC is you go, but you moved up here, meaning you don't live by your parents or your high school friends, your college friends. So we were ranked the second loneliest town in America, right behind Vegas. So you have all these educated, motivated people go, 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 and then they go back to their apartment and they're lonely. And so they take it to alcohol. And, you know, you go, okay, y'all need people and you're not as self-reliant as you thought. And so I'll adapt the language to talk about it specifically to a DC person, but you go, man, it just keeps rising up. Everybody wants intimacy and impact. I want to be a part of something and I want to be a part of something. And that's what we have. We have the most intimate, beautiful relationship they were made for, and we have the best story they could be a part of. And I think that is endlessly appealing because it's what the human soul is made for, you know?
Yeah.
So you talk about the intimacy and impact, and the self-reliant, highly motivated young adults that are there.
Mm-hmm.
What's been the response of that group in DC? I mean, you guys have done well. The church has grown. Have they gravitated towards it, or are they still sort of pushing back and trying to find themselves?
Yeah, I thought I was going to hit all this resistance up here from people. I had sort of like had my political arguments marshaled and some of the like, oh, people are going to really like your antiquated Bible sort of arguments. Like I was just expecting all this pushback, and I have not really hit it the way. I have tons of problems, but they're not the problems I thought. Like the problems I thought were coming did not come. The problems I never saw coming, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is, you know, the spiritual hunger in the human soul is not solved by money or success. And you got these young, motivated people that are getting a taste of success, getting a taste of power, getting a taste of fame, and realizing it doesn't really work. You know, I was talking with a chaplain the other day of pro athletes, and he said this is the easiest group to minister to because they have the thing everyone's chasing and realizing it's not enough. He's like, I don't even have to sell them on that. He said, I just lead with, so how's that working for you? And then work to the gospel.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, because it doesn't work. And we know that. And you know, and college kids are like, well, but maybe it'll work for me because I was the smartest kid in my high school. You know, but they get up here and they're like, man, life grinds that out of you. And you go, golly, I'm looking for answers. And they come in and it's funny up here. They're like, you guys are nice. You are kind. And the world is cold and the world is hard. And then we have grace and truth. You really love me. And I mean, I preach the Bible down in Texas, but even more now. Like I put the text on a screen. I'm like, you see what that says? Do you understand? I said, so if you're mad, be mad at God, not me. But I'm going to give you, you know, the Bible's intriguing to people, even if they don't believe it. So we have people come up all the time like, yeah, I don't believe any of this, but that's fascinating. I want to come back. I want to hear what else you're going to say about that. Like people are fascinated in the truth. So, like I said, we're not real fancy, but it's grace and truth, the fastball right over home plate, you know.
That's cool. And I know in a place like DC, it does not take long to get grinded. You know what I'm saying? I mean, my experience there in the ministry time that I had in DC myself, I mean, it does not take long for young people to get broken because you're right. I mean, you come there with so much anticipation of what you're going to do, and you're in the seat of power and prestige and prominence, and you know there's so much happening in DC all the time. And you go there and I mean not everyone, and you know not all things are bad and all that kind of stuff, but you can get grinded up quick in an environment like that. So it makes a lot of sense then that you guys are there and that they're being so receptive because you are a voice that's so alternative to what the norm is there. And I just think that's really cool. So so for you then, if you've kind of stepped in to Passion City and you're now in this context, in this environment, you're incorporating young people into what you do, and they're being activated, they're being trained, they're being engaged. So for you, what are some of the biggest discipleship hurdles that you're encountering in terms of this generation that you're dealing with, and how are you kind of overcoming those?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rob. Discipleship hurdles with this young generation. It's I would say the first two things that come to mind are, one, and this is something I find myself telling a lot of my friends that are in the South, is biblical literacy is at an all-time low. So people don't know the stories you're talking about, haven't in a lot of times encountered them at all. So certainly don't believe them or understand why they're relevant to their life. So I'm realizing you're having to back
Mm-hmm.
further and further up. Like I used to read, you know, sermons by like Charles Spurgeon, and you're like, these aren't helping me, because he assumes a knowledge base of
Right.
his audience. And at that time, rightly so. My context has none of that. So I'm like, you got to back way up in explaining some simple elementary things and be patient enough to do that. Because if you move too fast to application, so you shouldn't be doing this, or you shouldn't be sleeping with your girlfriend, people are like, what? Why not? Like, you're like, whoa, man, you got to go
Yeah.
way further
Gotta
back.
go way
than that.
back.
Like, so I hear a lot of guys that rush to application, and you go, there's some explanation that needs to happen. I mean, you're a missionary,
Yeah.
to an unreached people group kind of deal. So there's that. And then it's integrating it to the worldview. A lot of young people, they're inundated by the massive changes that have happened to the human brain since the last decade of the iPhone, and are not even clear how it's affecting them
Yeah.
in so many ways. Their ability to focus, their ability to have human interaction. And so there's not an integrated worldview of, oh, I can go to church, but then do this on Friday and Saturday. And there's not even really shame around that, or whatever, or guilt, or there's such a fragmentation in philosophy that I found it really takes patience to help people say, do you understand this? Do you believe these are the words of God? Okay, now let's talk about how this applies to your life. And if anything, for me, it's just made the epistles all the more relevant, because Paul does that all the time. He's like, you are dearly loved by God. He's changing your life. Here's the truth. Let's talk about your sex life. That's almost every epistle.
Yeah.
You're like, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
But you're like, hey. But those are the first things that come to mind.
Yeah, we recently talked with Addison Bevere. I don't know if you know Addison, but he was telling us about his book Saints, and he was talking about how Paul would call the church at Corinth saints and then call them into correction. He's like, hey, you saints, let's fix this. And so is that
Stop sleeping with your
stop
in-laws.
having
Stop getting drunk at
fornicate with
communion.
everybody in the village. That was kind of how it went. Y'all are saints, but we got to fix this. And so there's an interesting the patience required, and we actually, the biblical literacy thing, we just had a conversation over the weekend about. We were talking about a local pastor who does that really well, and they attract a lot of young adults and college students, but he does a really good job of backing the story up. And I've heard way too many pastors and preachers who make a lot of presumptions on things when you have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, he assumes you know no character. So if he tells you about Paul, he's going to say who Paul is. Or Stephen, he's going to say who Stephen is, or whatever, right? So
yeah.
I heard a guy say it once. He was talking in the political sphere, but he was saying, when I get on a mic, he said, I assume my audience is intelligent but uninformed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's what I wish every pastor knew. Don't talk down to people like they're dumb, because they're intelligent. I tell people what I've encountered in DC is it's like a computer. The processing speed of people up here is the fastest I've ever encountered, but the files are not found.
Yes.
And it's really energizing, man. I'll do Bible studies, in somebody's apartment. We'll do these little journeys through the Bible, and I'll sit there, and you're like, you're with the FBI, you're with the State Department, you're with, like, you do all this crazy stuff, but then I'm like, who's Paul? They're like, I got nothing. You're like, okay, all right, and it's awesome. You go, what a great spot to be in. And if you're easily offendable in that moment, you're going to have trouble So it takes a large degree of compassion. That's what I would encourage ministers to. Jesus said, he looked at the crowd and he saw they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And so he taught them, he had compassion. And so he taught them many things. He looked at this generation. He says, you're harassed. Like, no, they won't leave you alone. It's constant disturbance and you're helpless. You don't know how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than getting annoyed, he feels compassion. And I try to spend as much time as I spend studying the Word of God, studying the culture and studying young people. And when I see what the onset of all this technology has done to their ability to interact socially and the devastation it's caused, I want to feel compassion for them, not frustration with them. And then let that compassion fuel my teaching.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is echoing so much of the Barna research. It just came out on Gen Z especially, but I think what they say is there are a large number of Gen Z young adults, some millennials, that definitely believe in the Word of God, that definitely believe in Christ. They just don't know why. Right? They're not unintelligent. They're just uninformed, and I think those metrics are duplicated over and over again. Which I think if we're really going to have a healthy conversation about local church / getting young adults engaged, then I think it's required of us as leaders to own sort of the change that we need to make in order to help accommodate that gap. You know what I'm saying? I feel like that's part of my role here is to not stoop down or to, like you said, talk to them ignorantly as if they are ignorant, but to create pathways for them to engage in such a ways that they can learn and I can pull them on the journey with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's one of the best gifts of a minister is curiosity about people. As much as you're a student of the Word of God, be a student of your people and ask questions and ask what they think. And, it's like a good doctor. The more he asks you questions, the more he can diagnose your specific ailment, and
Right.
Francis Schaeffer used to say that. He said, if you give me an hour with somebody, I'll spend 55 minutes asking them questions. And then I'll spend the last 5 applying the gospel to their specific point of need. And you're like, that's it, man. Like, and you can do that online, Googling this generation, and there's a lot of help to get context for that. But I think for a lot of us in ministry too, it's just really knowing our people really well. Who's sitting in my crowd and talk to me, and let me see the normal, regular faces, but let me push past them to that person that I always kind of see back there. And can I hear can they believe that I want to hear what they think? Right, wrong, well articulated, not well articulated. And then when I'm standing in front of them to deliver a message, they're in my mind. They're who I'm talking to as I explain this. And the better we know our people, the better we'll apply what we have to their soul,
Yeah. Ben, I think one of the unique things you guys have done in Passion City, and we hit it on it earlier in the show, is that Passion is a multi-site model of sorts, but you're the primary communicator there in DC. And I remember we were at Passion with the door holder, and I love that name, door holder.
The door holder.
Yeah, we were showing us around a Passion, and we were talking about the growth of what was the expected growth of Passion City as a church in 2020. Obviously, everybody's plans have been shifted. And we were, and I was asking the question because I'm a bit of a nerd in the multi-site thing too. I said, so is Louis video into DC? And they're like, oh no, that would never work there. So what was, and maybe just the wisdom of Louis or yourself, how did you guys come to that realization of going, hey, what works in Atlanta won't work in DC? Because a lot of models, the primary communicator around the globe is piped in through video. You guys went against that grain. What took you down that road?
Yeah, and I don't know. I'd have to think about, could it have worked? I think you see with a lot of multi-sites, they tend to hit a lid on how fast they can grow or how big they can grow. I think with Louis and I, the discussions were, when we first came on, I said, man, I'm not really a multi-site pastor, just personally. And that's not a knock on those guys. I tend to summarize it, and this is very crude summary, but if you do what we do, you're part preacher, teacher, you're part leader, visionary, and then you're part pastor. So there's that part of you that loves to explain the word, thus saith the Lord. There's that
Right.
part of you that needs to cast vision, we're going there. And that part of you that sits and holds people's hands and cries
Yeah.
and cares about them. But no one's 100% at all three. You always have one that's higher than the other one, like everyone's built different. And a multi-site pastor tends to be the really pastoral person. Like I sat with a guy the other day that you're like, we went to a restaurant. He's a multi-site pastor in his town. He knew every single person in the restaurant by name and had been to all their houses. I'm like, how do you do that, man? Like, I like people, but not that much. Like, I'm not wired that way,
Yeah.
I'm more teacher first. Pastor's probably third for me. He's just like, man, the thought of preaching every week makes me sad inside, but getting to love people. So, the multi-site works really well if you got that pastoral leader guy. And so you see the multi-site model built with that big teaching voice and then a lot of pastoral folks.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. So in Atlanta, there's multiple locations
Right.
that all pipe in Louis as the teacher and visionary. But as we were looking at the longevity of passion, going to build it on just Louis' teaching gift, as amazing as it is, isn't probably the best long-term strategy. So can we move into different cities and have a city model where those cities have a teacher leader up front who can now build locations, multi-sites around that region? And could we duplicate that throughout the world? And that's the goal. That's the hope for us.
Yeah.
Is to build a model that doesn't suddenly get in real jeopardy when Louis gone, and so which Lord willing won't be anytime soon. But that's the idea: is can we take what's beautiful about the culture of passion, separate it? The leader is always going to be the culture carrier, but can we separate out? But what is essentially passion, and can we duplicate that in other cities? So we called what we did the grand experiment, and it was the grace of God. My wife and I, we flew around for 6 months to different cities, praying over where to move. Louis was really like, you got to live there, you decide. But we want them to be hinge cities, culture shaping cities. And DC snuck up on us. I mean, we were surprised how drawn we were to it. And we landed here, launched. And I remember about 6 months, a year in, Louis came up to preach. And that was the first time I looked over at him and looked at it and went, man, there's a lot of ways this could have gone wrong. Like there was a million ways we could have fallen off this horse. And we both just looked at each other like, it worked. And I think the secret to it working, you didn't ask this question, but was trust. Do I trust him, and does he trust me? And so far that seems to be working pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many facets to the multi-site conversation that maybe we need to sit down and have lunch in DC about or something. But I mean, I think if you go back to your comment about intimacy, right? And you go back to the comment about impact is the action piece, right? Integrating people into the body, getting them activated to serve the church, whatever your language is, that's the plan. But the intimacy piece, where I think the multi-site comes in, is it becomes very cultural specific, right? At least it's supposed to be. There are a few people like a Rick Warren or like a Louis Giglio or a Craig Rochelle who can communicate very well across cultures, right? But there are a lot of very successful multi-site paradigms out there that you can follow. And some of them are very centralized, meaning there's one guy sort of preaching and doing all the work, that's the head personality. Then there's some that are very decentralized, where the local pastors are that. They are simply the DNA carriers, the value bearers of that particular church structure organization, right? And they deliver. So whatever the model is, one thing that it seems to be very true about multi-sites is almost all of them are working, right, in some capacity. I mean, there's very few multi-site models that are disasters. Few here and there, but most of them are working well. But I think it comes back to this conversation of intimacy, because anytime that you can make the gospel personal and intimate, right, that translates in such a way as it becomes irresistible. And then when you have a broader value vision that's more global, that that reaches more people, that's something they can be a part of, that's the impact, right? So I think the
Yeah.
multi-site lends itself very well to those two realities.
Mhm.
I think that's one
Yeah.
of the reasons why it's so attractive and it's working so well currently. But that's my
Yeah.
little I go on all day about multi-site. So
Yeah, it's great. No, it's insightful. And it minimizes a lot of the frictions that can really cause,
yeah,
it's not glamorous to say it this way, but most church plants fail because of a lack of capital. It's the same reason why most startup businesses fail. And you go, man, that's a sad thing. And so if you can minimize that friction,
right.
and that's a good thing.
It's the little bit of the crude language of franchising, right? I
Hmm.
mean, we don't like to intermingle the
Yeah.
businessy terms a lot between the church and the living body of Christ, right?
Yeah.
And business models. But I think the level at which you're able to quote franchise your brand, your values, your DNA, all of those kinds of things, I think that provides a high level of success. And I think all truth is God's truth. And if we can borrow from the language of other
Mhm.
model systems, cultures, whatever, and apply it to how we deliver the gospel, and if it's effective, if it works, I'm okay with that. And some
Yeah.
people, I don't know, I'm sure you've probably gotten some pushback. Some people think multi-sites or mega churches are just number generating operations, and
Yeah.
uh having been a part of one, and you are too, we know that that's definitely not the case. So
Yeah. 100%. Well, and it's like what Paul said, my letter of recommendation is you guys. So at the
yeah,
end of the day, you go, well, you can critique a model and no model's perfect.
right,
But when you look up and say, hey, but my friend is a substantively better human being after being in your orbit, you're going to show up and say, what did y'all do to her? What happened to him? Like,
Yeah.
what's happening there? And that's on us. Can we create and foster healthy environments where people grow? And if we can, then a lot of those criticisms will fall, and people will walk with Jesus,
yeah.
you know?
Right.
So let's shift gears a little bit, since you're talking about growing. One of the big conversations that Jeff and I have on the show a lot with other leaders is the mentoring conversation. Some of them are conversations about people who have mentored them. Other conversations are about how they're mentoring others. Obviously, you and Louis have had a long standing relationship. So I guess the next question would be, how has he mentored you, and how are you in turn taking that mentoring and pouring it into others that you're influencing now?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I've found what I'm sure you guys have as well, and that is, I think when I was in my 20s, I kept thinking there was going to be like a mentor, in my life, and I
Yeah,
just
yeah,
realized it
Mhm.
doesn't really work that way. Like, God brings a ring of counselors and typically different ones you find are helpful in different avenues. And so when I was a youth pastor starting out, I met with a dozen youth pastors. And at the end of it, there was about three I would call. And over time, go, that one I call when it's this kind of issue. That one I call when it's that kind of issue.
Mhm.
That's held true all through my life. And even now, I'm grateful that I've got a handful of counselors that I call for various reasons. So one of my old pastors and I were on the phone the other day, and it's just a normal thing for me to call different ones. Louis's unique contribution to me is um, his supreme faith that anything's possible with the Lord. I mean, he just is not afraid to dream really big.
yeah,
And he always challenges me to dream bigger than what I'm dreaming. And his creativity is marvelous to watch from up close. So those are, I would say, looking at different people, those are things that I've just watched in him that you're like, those are marvelous. You're unique in those areas. And anytime I can get a window into how his mind works. And it's been fun. When I lived in Atlanta for a season prepping to launch, we would write series together. And it was fun to see how we approach a text and articulate it and build a sermon. We build them very differently. And I loved writing with him because it was just fun that our approaches actually complemented each other really well and
cool.
continue to, but it was just fun. It's really fun
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
watch that happen. Hmm.
So Ben, how have you taken the things been invested in you? A good friend of ours here on campus says, freely you received, freely give. He quotes Jesus in this area of mentorship. How have you been able to give that away then to other leaders or young leaders in your care?
Yeah, I would say, you look at the life of Jesus with his guys, proximity was the priority, and I used to teach that to young guys all the time. Take them to Mark chapter 3, said, hey, what was the call of an apostle? And it says, and he called them, they would be with him and preach and cast out demons. And they would always say, preach and cast out demons. I'm like, no, what's the call of an apostle? What's the first calling? They're like, preach and cast out demons. And like, you keep missing the first verb, which was be with him, just be near him.
Mm-hmm.
And, so for Louie and I, it was, before I launched, it was coffee together every week. It was traveling together to do things. It's in that proximity of shoulder to shoulder. You rub off
Right.
on one another. And so now up here, when I hired a staff, I'm like, man, I'm always going to have one of these guys with me and explaining what I do and why I do it. And then when we develop team leaders, we have our team leader meetings where we talk, here's our strategy to accomplish our goals, to reach who we are as an organization. So we have these team leader meetings. But that same group, I separated out a different meeting that's not the leader part. It's the word of God in your soul. I teach you the Bible. So because I want you to think like I think, I want you to approach the word of God the way I approach it. And so to me, I tell our team all the time, we are the white hot center of the fire. And if there's a lot of truth spoken in our world and a lot of love in our world, it's going to radiate out. So we spend a lot of time with our team leads doing that. So even last night, we were on a Zoom call with them for hours. And it's funny because, at the beginning, they were pretty stale meetings, but now the first 20 minutes was them sharing Jesus stories of how God is moving and encouraging each other's faith. And after a while, I'm like, okay, we got to move on, but to other stuff.
Yeah.
But it's that proximity is the priority. You just can't beat that.
Yeah.
And if they know I care about them, then they don't feel used when I put them to work. And we make our leaders work really hard. And if I'm depositing truth in their life, they feel like that exchange of deposit and withdrawal is there. So if I can give them those two things, grace and truth, I mean, this team, there's nothing, they don't even know what they're not capable of. I mean, they will charge any hill. It's really amazing.
That's cool. That's cool. So here's another kind of mentoring question. Another concept that we've been talking a lot about on the show is reverse mentoring. That's when, obviously someone younger than you that maybe doesn't have as much experience is pouring into your life. So is there a person or a situation or a lesson maybe that you can think of right off the top of your head where a younger person is saying, hey, how about this? And you're like, my goodness, I've never thought about that before. I mean, so how is there anyone reverse mentoring you right now? Or has there been a lesson you've learned?
Well, it's like a significant percentage of my church. I mean, I
Yeah,
am like
that's
the
right.
old.
Softball question here.
I'm not old, man, but I'm the old guy up here. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, so it's been fun. It's so energizing to be around the young people in our world. And
Yeah.
you take the thoughts, suggestions of everybody. Anyone can come up to me and tell me what they think, but I'm not going to internalize the guy that walks by like, your church should have a snack bar. Like, all right, man, thanks, dude. But like, I want to have the ones around me. Yeah, good leaders ask good questions. Leaders are inquisitive and creative. Why? What do you do, and why do you do it? That's the thing. Not just the what, but the why. What's the why behind the what? What can I get away from that? And when I sit with somebody, I try to do that, what I mentioned earlier, that Francis Schaeffer thing. Like when I sit with our young worship leader, anytime I travel and speak somewhere, one of my young leaders is with me. I want to be asking him more questions than he's asking me.
That's cool.
And not just the what questions, but the whys, and because his generation is what I'm reaching, and I want to be a student of that generation.
Yeah.
And certainly we've tried to create a high trust level with our leaders of, let's give you the vision and the values, but when it comes to execution of strategy, we want you to be creative and give them the room to do that. And it's fun to watch them surprise us with how they solve problems. tell them the problem to solve, not the way to solve it, and they'll surprise you with their ingenuity. And so we kind of like to see how that happens, you know.
That's cool.
So do you give your young leaders a wide berth on that, on the execution?
Yeah, and you know, they'll have staff members, and we don't have a very big staff, but they have staff members that oversee team leads, and team leads execute leading door holders. And so, you know, for us, they're all high caliber, fast moving people. So, you know, we rent a theater, it's a club in town. You know, when we show up, I mean, our first Sunday, the concert the night before started at 11, and it was the St. Patrick's Day smokeout, you know, and the lead band, their hit song was Doobie Ashtray. So when we showed up, man, like that place was like they had a rager. There were still people asleep on the stage, you know? So we were like, hey, man, you don't have to leave, but you got to scooch. Like, we're trying to set up for church, you know, like moving people around. But watching this young team, like, hey, we're going to design this space to make it welcoming. We chose this place because it's in the middle of the city. It's in the most ethnically diverse part of the city. It's a low barrier to entry. You may not walk into a big church, but you'll walk into this club. But y'all got to make this look great. And I don't actually know what I mean when I say look great. And, you know, then suddenly we've got,
I feel that way all the time.
Yeah.
they do this for a living, you know, in their business. And you're like, all right, man, then show me. And then you got the other ones that create data and spreadsheets and tracking info. And you're like, all right, man, well, then start building that for all of us. We regularly have leader meetings where it's like, hey, let's share best practices. What are you doing that's working? And let's try to let every team improve. So it's fun to see how they surprise us. And we've been able to grow, I think, pretty fast because of that, because we got high trust with a small group and the right group, and off we go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's wow. Lots of insight from Ben Stuart. I think the proximity is priority. Well, I'll probably steal and say a lot lately. So
Yeah.
I'll quit giving you credit probably after the third time. Just claim it as my own.
Yeah.
So I don't know who
We
you
say
stole
it
it
all the
from,
time
but
here.
if I ever end up in DC, I'll give you credit. Make sure people know there.
Oh,
But
sure.
around here, it's mine now.
There we go.
But
Yeah,
no,
man.
Ben, there's been incredible wisdom from that you've dropped on us, from discipleship, from leadership to church planting, church principles. We just appreciate it so much, and I know that and I hope our listeners have taken notes. There are a lot of things you said in a sentence or two that have a lot of weight to them. We could probably take 3 more hours and talk about some of the things you said, and unfortunately, we don't have 3 more hours, so we're all pretty busy. But we have one final question that we do want to ask. That we do ask every guest, and you have the floor on how you answer it. What is one lesson you learned in college that did not take place in the classroom?
Man, just one, huh?
Again, we got time.
No, I'll keep it there. Yeah. I would say that honesty is the doorway to intimacy. That's maybe what I would say. Like in college, I had my crisis of faith freshman year of just going, I don't know if I believe all this. I don't know. My mom said it was true, and God bless her, she could be wrong. But I decided until someone proves God's not real, I'll assume he is, but I'm not going to play the game. And I'm not going to sing a song to him I don't mean. I'm going to be honest, not disrespectful, but honest. And I went on a real I would read the Bible and then just write out in a journal, like, you sound mean here. Frankly, you sound petty. I don't really get that. Amen. Time's up. You then go to class. And, you know, the more I was honest with God, I think he loved it, because you can't be real. You can't have a real relationship with someone who's not real with you. I mean, we all know that. Like if someone, you're like, I'm always feeling like I'm getting like some fake version of them, then there's no intimacy there.
Right.
And college is when I quit playing the game and got real with God and risked how ugly the realness was in me. I didn't realize how angry I was, how hurt I was. And yet it created a pathway that by the middle of college, for the first time in my life, I could say it. I love him. I love God. For some reason, I always thought that sounded like weak or something when I was younger, but I was like, I fell in love with him in college. And it's because I was willing to risk the ugliness of honesty with him. And I would just encourage any young person listening to this, or not even young, but just any person, to do that. And, you can say, I just want to be authentic, like that's the goal. It's not the goal. It's the starting place.
Right.
But you can't move to intimacy without authenticity first. Okay,
Right.
and you see David do it in the Psalms. He starts angry, hurt, scared, afraid, and tracks towards trust and worship. And that was my college experience, man. It really was.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah.
We have enjoyed having you on the show so much, and looking
Thanks.
forward to staying connected with you guys. And we certainly will, probably in some capacity. But how can people stay in touch with you? How can we find you on social media, et cetera?
Yeah, Passion City Church DC, we're out there, YouTube and socials, and Ben Stuart, I'm out there. Instagram is where we do most of it right now, anyway, but we're all out there, and
Very
it's
cool.
good to hang with you guys too. Y'all
Yeah.
hang with good people. Luke Lazon's a good dude, and Passion, glad y'all were with us. And
Yeah, it was a
That's
blast.
fun. We had a good
It was
time.
awesome.
yeah,
Man, well, we appreciate you so much. And as we always say here on the show, you always got a seat at the table.
Thanks, Ben.
appreciate it, fellas.
Hey friends, thanks for listening to this episode of the Leadership Drip. We loved having you at the table for this conversation. Would you do us a favor and comment, rate, subscribe, and share on your social media? That way we can get this content to other great leaders. And stay connected with us on Instagram at The Leadership Drip and on Twitter at Leadership Drip. And remember, you have a seat at the table.